Good morning, dear friends. Welcome to the Conscious Living Spiritist group. We hope you and your families are well in this Sunday. For those who are joining us right now, I would like to ask a big favor. If you can just confirm that you can hear me well, if you on chat, because obviously I cannot hear you or see you, but you can always chat just to make sure our technology is working well. For those joining right now, once again, welcome to the Conscious Living Spiritist group. We are gathered together for a few minutes once again to remind ourselves of our spirituality, to strengthen ourselves together, considering the challenge that we are all still facing. Um, Today's team and speaker is a guest speaker known by many. I'm very excited to talk to him again after a while. Is our friend Flavio Zanetti from the Allan Kardec Spiritist Society of Massachusetts. And Flavio will talk about a very simple and easy topic, right? Marriage, divorce, and spirituality. Live well through life changing moments. So before we get to the lecture, um, we'll, as usual, do our initial reading and bring our minds and our hearts together. We'll do a reading from the book Our Daily Bread from Francisco Cândido Xavier and the Spirit Emmanuel, and then we'll go to the initial prayer. And Flavio will take us through his uh, his lecture. The lesson is lesson 110, personal magnetism, and it's from the book of Luke, chapter 6:19. And the people all tried to touch him, because power was coming from him and healing them all. Emmanuel elaborates, obviously, his thoughts on this particular verse. And he starts by saying, in actuality today, we've observed pleiades of eminent spiritualists, a large number of spiritualists, groups of spiritualists, spreading various concepts relative to personal magnetism with great astonishment, as if we were actually experiencing a novelty of the 19th century. This service of investigation and dissemination of the hidden powers of the individuals represents a valuable contest in the work of the present and future education. However, it is important to recall that the edification is not new. Jesus, in his passage through his planet, represented individualized sublimity of personal magnetism, in his expression substantially divine. Individuals would dispute over his enchanting presence. The multitude would follow his steps, touched with unique admiration. Almost all the people wanted to touch his clothing. Radiations of love emanated from him, which would neutralize recalcitrant illnesses. The master spontaneously produced a climate of peace which would reach anyone who enjoyed his presence. If you are seeking an easier path for the true blossoming of your psychic potential, it is logical, therefore, to take advantage of the experience that the earthly instructions offer you. In that sense, but do not forget the examples and the vivid demonstrations of Jesus. If you intend to attract, it is imperative first to know how to love. If you desire to achieve legitimate influence on earth, sanctify yourself through the influence of heaven. With this invitation from Emmanuel, dear friends, we would like to invite everyone for a brief prayer. And if you would like, you can close your eyes if you wish. And as usual, we would like to start by expressing your gratitude to God, our Creator, for this day where we can breathe in our physical body in this school of souls called Earth. We thank you, Father, for the opportunity, and we also thank our guardian angels or protector spirits for inspiring us to gather together today for a few moments. We ask you, please, to help us to absorb the most of the lessons so that we can help ourselves to overcome our inner challenges. We can help ourselves to make our hearts and our minds more peaceful among the challenges of life, and consequently help the ones around us, those who we share the same shelter every day. We ask, dear Father, that you bless and assist our brothers and sisters who were not able to gather together in this morning, but we know many are also going through their hardships. Give us all the strength and the perseverance and the faith to continue to advance, to continue to move on, and trust in the support, in your love that we receive every day. And finally, please assist and inspire our dear friend Flavio so that he can share his studies, his reflections that he prepared with so much care and so much love for all of us this morning. Thank you, and so be it. Okay, dear friends, to those who are joining us, welcome once again to Conscious Living. It's great to have you all here. And it's a great pleasure to introduce you to our dear friend Flavio. Good morning, Flavio.
Good morning, Marcos. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you so much. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. A little cold, as you know, as usual here in Boston.
I
But my
know.
heart and my spirit, right, figuratively speaking, is in Miami right now. Because when we woke up this morning, it was only 5 degrees. So
Okay, so
it's virtually Miami this morning.
greetings and warm welcome from Miami to you and your family. Flavio, we'll leave you with the team here. Have a good lecture, my friend. I'll speak to
Thank
you
you.
at the very end.
Thank you so much. Before we start, folks, good morning for those who are following us live. Hello, if you're following us through the recording afterwards. Still touched by this beautiful prayer, would like to keep our thoughts raised to our professor, Jesus, to really ask him for inspiration so that we could conduct this conversation here this morning with the same love and care through which we put together in preparation for you folks, right? So the topic, as Marcos alluded to in the beginning, it's a very easy one because I'm sure that you haven't really thought about it. Actually, some of you are already married. Some of you may have thought, about getting married at one point in your lives. Some of you have already gotten a divorce, perhaps. I don't know. Or some of you may have already gotten or thought about getting a divorce. The topic, folks, here impacts all of us. So, how do we look at these life changing moments under the light of Spiritism? Is divorce condemned by Spiritism? Is Spiritism against divorce? Are we supposed to, for example, stay in an abusive relationships? Is the concept of soulmates really exist? Those are some of the areas we'll touch upon this morning. But once again, for us to do that, I'm going to invite you to buckle up, right? Uh, Enjoy the ride. And if you have any questions, any comments, I think Marco is going to be our moderator. Just throw them out there. We'll love to see them coming as we really develop these thoughts. All right, let's get going. Let's start. The first topic that I want to bring to you guys here is this woman. Her name is Sophia Hussani. And obviously, the marriage is complicated. If you are in a married relationship, I'm sure you know that. And this book here called I, Sophia, is a first-hand account of a woman's courageous struggle for justice in Nigeria. This story took place in 2001 and really impacted the whole world because in a small Nigerian village of Tungur Tudu, my pronunciation goes right. If anybody's from Nigeria here, please feel free to correct us. Sophia Hussani was accused of adultery. She was arrested. She was taken away from her farming village in northern Nigeria. She was brought before a court, a Sharia court, and she was sentenced by stoning. Let's look at what happened through Sophia's life. When she was 13, she was offered to a neighbor husband. After 4 children, she buried 4 children. She was repudiated by her first husband because she was too old and too ugly to continue being his wife. She got married 3 more times after that, so 4 weddings. She had 7 kids total. Then a distant cousin came in to live in the same village. And that distant cousin was helping her, was working with her, and then they found in love. Sophia was about to be divorced from her last and 4th husband while she got pregnant. When Adama, her daughter, was born, she was already divorced. But according to the courts, her crime was to become pregnant outside of marriage and to give birth to her little girl, even after being divorced. The child's father first accepted responsibility, but then he changed his story, denied everything, and he was released without penalty. She was betrayed. She was terrified. She was outcasted. Sophia summoned the strength to fight for her life. Obviously, she was supported by her family, her lawyer, and her faith in God or Allah. She was determined to stay alive, to care for her little girl. This book, my friends, is an amazing recollection of how spirituality, how her faith kept her going. How much so that I think it's, I'd like to start by us picturing ourselves in that situation. Most of us won't have to endure the difficulties that Sophia did, going through her young years, going through the dynamics of marriage in that particular part of the world. But when you look at that, it shows us how marriage could be a complicated topic. So for us to really delve right into marriage, I think it's important for us to look at the history of marriage. And we're going to use Stephanie Kuntz in her a book called Marriage, A History, How Love Conquered Marriage. Because the whole idea of love, people getting married because of love, that's very recent. Very, very recent days that we see that. And Stephanie talks and she takes readers from the marital intrigues of the ancient Babylon to the torments of the Victorian era, and then all the way down to recent times where love became the sword, the main reason for folks to get married. And how absurd you have seemed to most of our ancestors that now we get married because of love, not because of interests, not because of our families and whatnot. If you take a little step into, for example, the Renaissance, the reason for people to get married was solely to secure environment, protection of rights, and continue bloodlines. That was the main reason in the Renaissance. If we really go forward and look at, for example, the 9th century, the Pope or the clerical church by that time needed to give consent for people to get married. In the 16th century, the witnesses were needed because people were playing around with the concept of marriage. And then obviously, when we look at history of marriage in the 20th century, we see now societies worshiping the couple. The love becomes the main reason for marriage. But maybe a little interesting or curious fact: this place in Maryland called Elkton, which we can say here that is the wedding capital of the East. And the funny or the curious thing about here is, before, for folks to get married in the 20th century, they were to go in, they would need a certificate, the city clerks need to approve folks to get married, but not in Elkton. Elkton, people could come in and could get married right away. To the point that lines and lines of people from all over the United States flooded this little town in Maryland just to be able to get married and not go under the approval of city clerks and city officials and whatnot. A little history of marriage according to maybe a different religion that we sometimes don't look into much. This is a book from the Al Quran called Shura or Ram, Ayah 21. And in this book, the Allah, the Prophet, through his angels or through his writers, talk about this paragraph that I want to quote and talk to you guys about. And among his or the Creator's signs is this: that the Creator created all of us, mates or folks, to really get together with us, and from among yourselves, that you may dwell in tranquility with them, and he has put love and mercy between your hearts. Verily, in that are signs for those who reflect. And we'll take a pause here, folks, because oftentimes we saw, for example, the example of Sophia in the beginning, living in Nigeria. She was, going through a lot of difficulties in that country, who still has or had at the time she was in that whole dynamics, Sharia law, which is guided by Islamism. Here we have a paragraph from Al Quran, the book, that talks about every time. In a nutshell, what this paragraph wants to tell us is that every time two people want to get married, what happens? God gives us the ability to be able to love each other. And not only that, but also God gives us love and mercy between our hearts. And that's one of the reasons why, right, we are quote unquote successful in marriages. But are we really successful in marriages? As we're going to see down the road, what about divorces? What about the statistics around divorces? What do Spiritism talks about when it comes to divorce? We'll get there in a minute. But I think the reflection that's important for us to bring upon us here is that if you look at different areas of spirituality, different religions, different philosophies, we all understand that marriage is an amazing institution that gives us the ability, or gives us the opportunity, I should say, for us to grow, for us to together, thanks to love and mercy and perseverance and kindness and companionship and partnership, to really grow as a couple, and not only one person versus the other, not this competition. Al Quran is very clear when it talks about that. Same if we maybe shifted back to Christianity, Paul, in his letter to the Ephesians, he talks about that too. Chapter 4, verse 2, look at what he says. Always be humble and gentle. Be patient and accept each other with love. Folks, we could talk about this paragraph for a couple of hours, because when we look at this, always be humble. Is that an easy suggestion? No, it's difficult to be humble sometimes, because we don't know what we're capable of. We think we know what we're capable of. And here, let me just make a paragraph that the concept of humility It's not that it's often translated into poverty or simple. No. The concept of humility here that Paul wants to come across is the idea that we know ourselves, we know our capabilities, we know what we can do. And being humble is having that knowledge. He's understanding that, yes, I'm able to do that. Actually, no, I'm still not able to do that, but I'm going to work myself. I'm going to learn. I'm going to really develop myself in order to be able to do that. So, that concept of humility, knowing, for example, that if my partner does something to me that I don't like, am I able to talk to him or her about it? If my partner says something that I don't appreciate, am I able to talk to him or her about that? I have a deal with my wife when we've been married 16 years, and I have a deal with my wife that we never go to bed looking sideways. So whatever happened during the day, if there was some disagreement, anything, we have to make amends before sleeping. And that's something that my grandma used to say. Forget, I mean, folks, you may remember some of the advice you gotten from your grandma. I'll tell you, grandma's advices, they're always spot on. And my grandma said, Flavio, once you get married, she never met my wife, by the way, but once you get married with whoever, you need to make sure that you guys don't ever go to bed. If there's something that's in between you guys. So that's one advice that I learned from my grandma that I put in practice into my marriage, and it works really well. Why? Because if I did something to her that she didn't like, or if she did something to me that I didn't appreciate, or vice versa, because guess what? If you got into marriage, that's going to happen. And if you're newlywed, it may not have happened yet, but trust me on this, folks, it will happen because that's normal. That's a relationship, it's a partnership. We're not 100% in sync when it comes to goals, aspirations, future projects, and needs, and whatnot. So we've decided to say, you know what? Before we go to bed, we gotta clear the air here. Well, needless to say, sometimes we ended up talking all the way up to the morning or the sun rose, but that's a different story. So I guess what I'm trying to say here, folks, is that when you look at Paul's suggestion or advice, first, always be humble, always be gentle with each other, be patient, and accept each other with love. It seems simple, but it's very complex. Very complex because when we look at the modern times, right? That's our family sometimes, or that's our family nowadays because of society's invitations, because of the life that we live. Maybe that's a typical couple these days. The husband always tied up with work and this and trying to do this and that. The wife is tired because, oh my God, I can't wait to go to the beach. And for you folks in Miami, the beach is always there almost all year long. For us here in Massachusetts, we only have a very short time for us to go to the beach. So that's less common than for you guys. So people think about that more often, especially when it's, right now it's 10 degrees outside and there's snow and ice everywhere. So the beach becomes more and more, appealing for us. But then you look at the son, the daughter. What I'm trying to say here, folks, is that modern times have contributed to a lot of these anxieties, a lot of these things that the marriage as an institution is suffering. So, for example, the question that remains is what happened to love, to mercy, to humility, to kindness, to acceptance? Where did that go? We learned that from Paul. We learned that, through the Al Quran. Most major religions out there that we have studied and read upon marriage, they give great advice. Why isn't people paying attention to those advices? That's a question we should ask ourselves. What's happening with our societies nowadays that we're not paying attention to these and we're jumping into conclusions, we're jumping into solutions right off the bat without working them out, without spending time talking about them and doing things that are important to be done. So when you look at, for example, the dynamics of the family, it's always an important one because even though we learned that the family is the basis, or the first cell of a society, its importance is the utmost importance. to the point that Mother Teresa would go venture to say that if you fix the family, you fix all the world's problems. Because as we learn through Spiritism, a lot of our teachings, a lot of our needs are there within our families. Correct? So, family is not only a focus of battles and problems and challenges, but it's also this engine that produces happiness. When all of its components are thinking about the future, are thinking about the spiritual purposes that brought us to that same family. Okay, Flavio, but hang on a second. You have no idea how my family is. Actually, I don't. You're right, I don't. And this is one of those times that if we were, face to face in a stadium or in an audience, I would ask the question, raise your hand if nobody in your family is problematic. And usually nobody raises their hand because every one of our families, there's somebody that's problematic. And then one time somebody raised his hand and said, I'm not problematic. I don't have anybody that's problematic. I said, wow, that's a first. And then he continued, because I don't have anyone that is problematic because I'm the one that's problematic for others. So it speaks volumes when we look at that. Because again, family is this school for us, is this vehicle that can really achieve happiness if we decide to look at that with that perspective, in that angle. Not easy, obviously, but that's the overall goal or the motivation for us to get there. But what happens when we don't pay attention to those things? What happens when we, ended up in a situation or in a wedding or in a marriage that we don't really see future? Oftentimes, divorce happens, correct? So let me guide you through these statistics. And if you look at the bottom are the years, right, between 1921 and 2003. You may ask the question, Flavio, why did you stop in 2003? Because that's the interesting, data points for us to decide here. But after 2003, things stayed pretty much the same. If you look at the if you look at the blue first, that's the number of marriages throughout the world. And then green is the number of the percentage of divorces. If you look at right here between 1945 and 47, people were exhausted after the Second World War. The GI Bill came back and people just got married in flux, right? They just, a huge influx of marriages, so to speak. But then, what about these divorces? So 2003 onwards, for pretty much every two marriages, right now, one ends up in a divorce. Now, let's twist this a little bit. Let's imagine we were all talking about investments, okay? Let's imagine that we were all talking about putting our hard-earned money in a savings account or putting our hard-earned money in an investment account. What would you say if I told you, hey, give me all your money, all your hard-earned money, put in this, account here with me, then I give you 50% chances you're going to make money back. The other 50% chances you're going to lose all your money. Would you do that? Would you honestly do that? That's what the graph is telling us. For every two marriages, one ends up in divorce. So there's a 50-50, roughly 50-50 chance that my marriage will end up in a divorce. So how do I avoid that? I think that's the critical question here. Statistics are one thing, but how do we get ahead of it? And if we are about to get married, or if you're already married, what are some of the things that we need to do to ensure that we avoid? Because one thing that we learned from Spiritism, my friends, is the most traumatic event that we go through in our lives is the passing of a loved one. So when somebody that we love passes away. Yeah, we know about reincarnation. We know that we're going to reunite with that individual, that person later on. Nevertheless, it still brings a huge trauma to our lives. Okay, the grief and the moments and all that. That's the most traumatic event. The second most traumatic event, guess what? It's divorce. That's why you see some very complicated divorces out there that involves financial, fights and there's a lot of complications behind some of these divorces. So how do we do? Or what are some of the things we can do to try to not only avoid but minimize the overall impact? I'm going to start by saying or bringing this phrase from Kabar Schutel, who's a Spiritist author. He writes a lot about the Gospels, and he has a great quote that I want to say to you guys here because I think this resonates with what we're trying to say. It's really essential, meaning there's no other way. It's pivotal. It's the most important component to spiritualize marriage or any union, any partnership, any, any partnership for that matter. Giving it a truly moral stamp, meaning I'm here to get better, to become better, to accomplish more things, to do greater things. Because any union needs love. We know that. But he doesn't stop there. He says kindness, respect, and work from the heart and the brain. But let me stop here a little bit. Because my friends, if you recall, you may have read this in other publications, the most arduous, the most difficult journey that we can ever make in our lives is not all the way down to the Antarctica. No, it's the longest journey or the longest travel that we'll make. It's between our brains and our hearts. And this is exactly what Kaibar Shuto is telling us. To make that connection, because you got to work from your heart, you got to work from your brain. From an understanding that there's much more than just a simple, getting together and people, getting together and married. There's this understanding that happens at the spiritual level with the benefit and the effort from both loved beings. Notice the benefit and the effort from both loved beings. It's not my benefit, her effort, my effort, his benefit. No, it's benefit and effort from both loved beings. This, again, sentence is very deep because in order for us to spiritualize marriages, we need to do these things. Those are some of the steps that is highlighting that we should do. And then John Evangelist, the spirit guide that really is with us in every aspect of our lives, has a very poignant sentence that she says, for every union, all the responsibilities are reciprocal, demanding both parties' contribution towards the general benefit. And here's what I tell you, folks, that in our house here, in our household, I don't help my wife with house chores. People go, oh, how come you don't help your wife, Flavio? So I don't help my wife because if I were to help her, that would have meant that all the house chores are her responsibilities only. We share activities. We share things that we do in our house. There are some things that I'm better at. There are a lot of things that she's better at. So we share. We just divide some of the responsibilities. And of course, in your household, you may have different, sets of responsibilities that you share. But the goal here, folks, is that there isn't only one party that's responsible. No, it's a partnership, as the word goes. It's a partnership. And we have to really act as if it's a partnership. To have understanding, to have agreement, as opposed to, oh, you're because your situation or because of your gender or because of your condition or because of whatever, it's self-assumed that person will do X, Y, and Z. Again, that's what Joanna is highlighting that we should think about. Correct? Okay, Flavio, I get it. It's so beautiful now, but can you give us some examples of what happens when people get married? So what's the motivation? And of course, there's no one rule of thumb for motivation, but one thing that we can say is that right now there are two kinds of motivation for people to get married. And one of them is, affection, right? From the body. Oh, she's good looking. He's good looking. He's charming. She's this and she's that. That's that affection. And the second one is the affection of the soul. Notice that this is a works by Joanna the Angelus, and she talks about the affection for the body is perishable. Because in case you haven't noticed, the law of gravity helps or works for everybody. We all know that, right? We're not getting younger by any minute. Even if we may, ended up doing some other procedures, but we're not getting any younger. So we're not getting, prettier by the minute. It's actually the opposite. So that affection of the soul, that friendship, that idea that, we're partners is what Joanna the Angelus talks about. That's the long-lasting condition for folks that folks should pay attention to when getting married. Joanna goes even to the point to say that people don't get divorced for the wrong reasons. Folks get married for the wrong reasons. Let me repeat that, folks. Folks don't get divorced for the wrong reasons. People get married for the wrong reasons. But what are the reasons, Flavio? Here are the ones. Let's not look at affections that are perishable. For example, material, possessions, a good-looking body, No, these are all things that are gonna maybe go away tomorrow. We don't know. The affection that's long-lasting is how much we enjoy that person's company, how much we enjoy spending time together, drinking teas, drinking coffee, having lunch together, all these things that we do with our partners, how much we enjoy that. And if you can say that that's the main motivation for us to get married, that's great, right? But let's not kid ourselves, folks. When you're very young, usually the first motivation is the perishable one. Oh, she has a great voice. He's very charming. Oh, she's beautiful. He's good looking and all that. It's okay as being the first motivation for us to look into somebody, but not the last motivation, because if it is, that might be perishable. And that's exactly what Joanna talks about it. And not only her, but there are several other authors that talk about that. For example, J. Armani says that marriage represents a high degree of evolution for the human being. As you can read here in blue, high degree of evolution for the human being. Why does he say that? Because let's picture this. Once we are single, we are by ourselves, we live by ourselves, we control the time, we control what we want to do. We just, hey, my life, I can do whatever I want with my life. But then you decide to get married. You fall in love with an individual, and then he or she, conquers your heart, and you fell in love and you decided to get married. Guess what? It's not about you anymore. It's about you and that person. That's a great invitation for us to work on our selfishness, because it's not gonna be about me anymore. It's gonna be about me and that particular individual. Not that my life is now the lives of the two. We all should still have our individual lives, but I have to, have that respect. I have to work with that individual to agree on some of the terms. To agree, hey, honey, I wanted to go to bed at 10 o'clock as opposed to 1 in the morning. Or I want the thermostat to be 68 as opposed to 62 when I go to bed. Luckily, this is something that, I'm not lucky, but I should say, curiously speaking, that's something that my wife and I, in the beginning of our relationship, we had a little difficulty understanding each other. Because I'm sure you know, folks, men and women, they're not created the same, right? Jokes aside. So she'll go, we're like about to go to sleep, and she'll go, honey, it's cold here, right? I mean, it's a little cold here. And I would say, yeah, it's a little bit cold. Yeah, it's a little bit chilly. It's January in Boston, and it's okay. And then she goes, she'll just, nudge me with her elbows. Hey, it's really cold here, isn't it? No, it's nice. Get the comfort, get the blanket. Let's go to bed. Cuddle and go to bed or whatever. But she was trying to tell me that, can you just go up and change the thermostat? She didn't say that. She said it was just cold. Again, try to understand and read that individual's point of view or dynamics or reality. That's a huge opportunity for us to grow as per, because guess what? We're all different. We're all immortal beings that have different experiences. And the fact that we are coming together as one family under the same roof, it's an opportunity for us to talk about these things, to learn where the other person sits, and vice versa. But it has to be done respectfully. It has to be done with consideration from both spouses' perspective. That's what Armani talks about. Both spouses' perspective and standing firmly through loyalty. And loyalty here is much more than just loyalty from a betrayal's perspective. Loyalty of our thoughts, loyalty of our plans, loyalty of really working together with that individual towards the future. That's what this author talks about. And if these things are met, as checkboxes, right? If these things are met, that's a good recipe for a very successful marriage. Okay? But Flavio, I get it, but he doesn't talk about love, does he? Where is love in all this? Can we comprehend where love is? You know that? So we have several explanations. So, for example, Emmanuel talks about love being God's light, even so that it shines in the depths of our abscess. That's what Emmanuel talks about. Love, Joan de Angelis talks about love being the exuberant life, the main reason why God manifestates. So God really manifests itself of the self who thinks and feels. Meaning, when we look at love, it's how God talks to us, right? To love is to serve, Andrew Lewis talks about, and to love is to understand how we could help, how we could bless, and for us to be free. It's impossible to be free without the capabilities of love. So all these things are reflections of love, but Joanna goes even beyond in her psyches talking about love. She says, what keeps a marriage awake is not the sexual pleasure. Oftentimes it's a fugitive. It's just an excuse, even when inspired by love. So she's telling us to go beyond sexual pleasures. Let's not be let's not fool ourselves, right, folks? Sex is a good thing. It's important for the couple. It's important. We learned it through Spiritism. It's not prohibited. No, it's important. It's there. It's how couples procreate. We know that. It's how couples share love. It's how couples really connect with each other. There's a lot of benefits of sex, but that's not the only motivator. That's what she's trying to say. But rather, friendship, which responds to the emotional exchanges through dialogues, through thinking of together, really putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes, to have an interest in somebody else's development, to have a really stake in the ground on somebody else's, our partner's achievements, and by the joy that one feels esteemed and useful. That's what keeps marriages together. So Joanna goes even beyond the traditional components of marriage, talking to us about what are some of the things that we need to do to keep us together. We learned from Mahatma Gandhi, where there's love, there's life. That's no difference than that, right? And then imagine if we are all sitting in a conference room or in a spiritist center. This is a picture I want to share with you guys. And then the question I have for you is, what do you see what comes to mind when you see this picture? Maybe you could use the comments on Facebook, or if you're following us live through any media. What are some of the things that you see when you look at this picture? Oftentimes, the answer that we get, oh, it's a gay couple, right? But can we see love in this picture? Can we see partnership in this picture? Can we see a family? Thank you, Jessica, in this picture. So, folks, what I'm trying to say to you here is, as we develop, as we progress with our societies, thankfully, more and more, we see folks looking at a picture like this and talking about love, talking about happiness. In the same way that I invite you all to think, when you look at a couple's picture, when you look at situations in our lives, let's look with the eyes of our spirituality that's behind us. Let's look within the eyes that, for example, at home, we can really find the stimuli towards work, towards happiness, that really encourages us and really drives those afflictions that correct us. Marriage is not easy. We know that. Marriage is complicated. Yeah, that's not secret to you guys. Let's not fool ourselves. Correct? And that's why Kardec very wisely asked the immoral spirits a very interesting question. For example, the marriage or the permanent union of two beings. Notice, Allan Kardec did not ask the permanent union of a man and a woman, but it says two beings. Is contrary to the law of nature? And the answer is very quick. He said, no, it's the progress achieved by the human race or the humankind. Correct? So marriage is progress, folks. And when we look at marriage the way it is today, through the history of marriage, now that we are able, and thankfully we're able to get married to those ones that we love, that's an accomplishment that we have had as a society, as a humankind, as spirits that we all are. So we should feel proud of that, accomplishment. Then on the opposite of that, Kardec also talks about, if you look at family ties, what will be for society the relaxation of these family ties. So let's say tomorrow there's no more marriages, nobody gets married anymore, the concept of getting together, building a family together, building a life together goes away. What happens to us if that takes place? He asked that question. And the spirits were very pivotal on the answer. It's an upsurge of selfishness. Because as I mentioned before, for us to be successful in marriages, we have to be selfishless. But if we're not able to, it's because our selfishness is playing a bigger role in the relationship. Eventually leading to what? Right? Divorce as a solution. And folks, we're not suggesting that we should stay in an abusive relationship. Spiritism does not condemn divorce. Actually, Spiritism doesn't condemn anything. Everything is permitted within Spiritism. What we learn through Spiritism is all the consequences for such actions. So if we are in an abusive relationship, we got to think wisely. Is it the best for me to stay here? What are some of the complications? What are some of the developments that would happen with this relationship? To the point that even Kardec himself made a very interesting comment that even though, remember, the first publication of Spiritism in 1857 was when a lot of countries didn't have divorce as a law. And Kardec says, or made a comment, that human law that aims to legally split or separate what is, in fact, already separated. That's what divorce is trying to say. It is not contrary to the laws of God, no, for it only reforms what human beings have done and is only applicable in cases in which divine law has not been taken into account. So the suggestion here, folks, is if there's no other way out, if there's no other resource for us to take into consideration, then so be it, right? Divorce should happen. That's what Allan Kardec is talking about here. Because we all know nothing happens by mistake. We're not here by accident. God doesn't throw dice, as Albert Einstein used to say. So when we look at, for example, our relationships, there is an affinity with that individual. I got married with him or with her, or to him or to her, for a particular reason, correct? So that's why there is a right time for divorce only after we have exhausted all the other tools, all the other things that we have in front of us in order to work that out. Therapies and reading and getting together and working together and putting a plan in place, all those things. If that doesn't work, if that's still a challenge, then perhaps divorce might be the next steps. But let's think about this for a second, because once again, if we have a relationship with that individual, there's some history there. And the history that we're talking about here is, we're not changing, right? The laws that we know. So much so that Joanna talks about modern times, they do not change the laws of life, which are immutable. We have a situation or condition with that individual, and Joanna is very emphatic when she talks about the people that incarnate in a family, above all, as close relatives, meaning in wedding and marriage and sons and daughters and all that. They are more often than not sympathetic spirits, those spirits that we have relationships in the past. We're linked by previous lives. And we express in this life a reciprocal affection. And that's why we decided to get together. The concept of, you know, not only family blood, but universal, right? Family. That's the idea that she's talking about here. And she even goes beyond to give us some tools for us to try to fix that marriage that's going sour, that's going downhill. Flavio, how do I fix my marriage? I'm not a counselor to give you advice, but we can say, we can leverage is what Spiritism is telling us for over a century, that there are some tools. Yes, there are some tools for a healthy marriage. And I would add that there are some spiritual tools that we can rely on for a healthy marriage. For example, the first one that I think it's important to mention, we've talked about that before. Family has its sacred origins in the spiritual space. Okay? It is always a result of certain resolutions for me to get better, for the person to get better, for us to get better together, for us to work together. Okay? It's a school. Oftentimes it's a hospital as well. But nevertheless, it's a great opportunity. It's a great dynamic for us to get better at it. And then taken in the life of the infinite, meaning oftentimes our marriages, we planned them even before we came down here. That's what that's what Emmanuel is talking to us about. So the consequence of these commitments freely assumed by the souls, by ourselves, because we all have free will. So I think about, hey, but Flavio, is there such thing as soulmates then? Does that mean that before I was born, I knew that I was going to marry so and so? No. We learn from Spiritism that no, there isn't such thing as soulmates, unless it's a marriage that there's a lot to be accomplished. There's a lot at stake in that marriage. For example, Allan Kardec and Amélie Boudet, his wife, that was always by his side every step of the way. Mahatma Gandhi and his wife, which her name forgets my memory now. So those are the examples of marriages where those souls were so committed that they built a massive plan together in order to execute towards the benefit of societies in general. For those are the exceptions of the rules. For all of us here, we have a lot of spirits, and we have affinities from previous incarnations and whatnot. So the concept of getting together, spending time, getting married, or building a life together, we may have decided that, but perhaps halfway through the process, we gave up or we decided something else. We all have free will. We all have the ability to make those decisions. What I'm trying to suggest here, folks, is that even if we made a decision, we should own it. Or whenever we make those decisions, we should own it and do everything we can to have these tools or leverage these tools that are available for us in order to really have a successful marriage. Yeah, they may still not work out. I get it. But let's try our best in this endeavor, which we call marriage, to make it work. For example, the first one that I'll say or share with you guys is, let's pray together. Praying is magical. Praying is how we connect with spirituality. Through prayers that our guardian angels, God, Jesus, our professor, they hear our thoughts and our wishes and our asks. Why not pray together? That's our first suggestion for all of us, right? Let's pray together. The second suggestion, which is connected to that, let's practice gospel at home or Jesus in the home, where we pick up a book, where we open up a book at a certain time, and then we say a prayer, quick prayer. We read the passage, we make comments, we invite our guardian angels to come to our place, to our house, so they can really magnetize the water. They can spend time with us. They can clean our environment. They can give us motivation to keep on going, to keep on progressing, to keep on conquering new battles and things like that. When we look at these things, there's so many tools out there that we can leverage. Of course, there's therapies and couples therapies and counseling, and there's a lot of these things. But if we are able to connect all these tools in addition to the spiritual tools that we have in front of us, it really increases our likelihood of being successful in our marriages, right? That's the bottom line here. And if you look at all the complexities, if you look at all the difficulties that we have, for example, from marriage, one thing that I'm going to invite us all in the name of Khalil Gibran, the prophet of all times, that he invites us to say, or he says, by inviting us, saying, but let there be spaces in your togetherness, and let the winds of the heavens dance between you. Meaning, we are married to our loved one, but we're not the same. We still need our own lives. We still need to be ourselves. And every time somebody refuses to be him or herself, that's a recipe for not a successful marriage. Of course, with love, of course, with kindness, as we learn from the Gospels, from Paul, from all Corinth, it's all there. No matter what kind of spiritual book that we open, we have access to many guidelines on successful marriages with love, kindness, humility, being part of the game, sharing the responsibilities, working in this partnership together. All these things are great, but it's also very important for us to continue being ourselves, for us to continue developing ourselves as spirits that we all are, helping each other out, working with each other out, but not really expecting that person to be like we are, and not expecting ourselves to be like that person. Because, folks, when is the time that you can change anybody? No, you just can't, right? Never. We can never change that individual. We can work together towards growth, towards progress, but at the end of the day, we have to bring our best self to our marriages. We have to bring our best game, right? As we say, to our marriages. And aligned with material tools, in addition to spiritual tools, we can really make sense of these great institution that is marriage, or working together to build a family, to really have this school in front of us every single day for us to progress as immortal spirits that we are. So hopefully, my friends, if you're following us from all over the world, these small snippets of suggestions may have motivated you to do a little better for your marriage. And if the time comes that you have to go through a divorce, let's try to take the best out of it. Let's try to think that that person that we are splitting up with, it's still our brother or sister from a spiritual lens, from a spiritual perspective. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your kindness. And I wish you a blissful and joyous marriages and opportunities for the future. Thank you so much. Marcos, back to you, my friend.
Thank you, Flavio. Thank you so much. Great and amazing reflections. And I was just reflecting myself, right? Sometimes we are all hurt and struggling that we fail to bring that A game, right? And when there's no communication, then we start thinking about what's happening with each other, right? And making assumptions in our minds. So I think, what you share about talking to each other and that communication is essential, right?
Key. Yeah, the thermostat. I love to say it all the time because the thermostat is a big one, right? I mean, we have different ideas of what cold is, what hot is, what this warm. Again, if we make assumptions, it's not getting us further. It's not getting us down the road.
Very true.
Communication is key. It's pivotal.
Very true. And how often we forget to reserve that space for prayer or for Jesus in our lives, right? We just live one day after the other in the rush of our activities. And I think that's, your reminder to all of us is an opportunity for us to renew that commitment which is so important. So thank you for that.
100%. Yep.
Flavio, lots of comments and appreciation for the lecture on the chat. And I know we are at the end of our time. Can you lead us into a final prayer, my friend?
Absolutely. Happy to.
Thank you.
Yep. Let us try to connect with our spirituality, with our guardian angels. My friends, let's imagine the figure of our Professor Jesus coming close to us, whatever we may be right now, sitting on a couch, standing up, laying down. He comes close to us, opening up his arms, inviting us for a hug, embracing us as an older brother that he is. Jesus would like to tell you how thankful we are for being able to spend a few minutes of our time learning more about your teachings, about your gospel. Oftentimes translated in different words, in different authors. We couldn't care less, Jesus, because the teachings are there. Your teachings are there. So we thank you so much for this opportunity. And we ask you that you may bless all of our marriages, that you may stay with us, even sometimes that we have to go through some divorces. May we always be inspired by your teachings, by your actions, by your thoughts, so that we can really be called your followers, your disciples. And above all, Master, Professor, and friend Jesus, take this prayer to our Heavenly God, our Creator, in gratitude for this time. May also God continue to bless and to shine light with our own pathways so we can continue progressing and being there for our spouses, for our partners. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, beloved spirits who are with us. Amen.
So be it. Thank you, Flavio. Thank you so much. A virtual hug to you, my friend,
I
and
know,
to
right? Yeah.
everyone. And to everyone who is watching, God bless you all and your family in the week ahead. And we'll see you next time. Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.